I've saved my changes as bleedyghost.ai, found inside the 11 printing folder, so called because I've established bleed boundaries around each and every one of my artboards. And that's great because I've got a fair amount of extra imagery to work with here, so my image completely fills up that bleed boundary. And these little zaps of electricity off the robot's finger extend out beyond the bleed boundary as well. However, I've made a critical mistake in drawing the framing elements. Each one of the framing elements ends exactly at the boundary of the artboard, which means that I have no wiggle room where my trim size is concerned. So if my commercial printer's trim drifts just ever so slightly, as you can rest assured it will, then I'm going to reveal some of the edge of these framing elements, which is bad form at best. So what's the solution? Well, a couple of different solutions to choose from. The right thing to do takes a lot of effort. You'd have to manually edit every single one of these framing elements along the edge of the artboard in order to extend it out to fill in that bleed boundary. And that would take a fair amount of work. As I say, that's hand editing. That would be the right thing to do if you've got the time. But let's say you're running low on time, you're running even lower on patience, and you just want to come up with a quick solution. Well, this is the quick solution. It's a little bit of a fudge, but what we're going to do is we're going to add a stroke around the boundary of the image. Now, technically speaking, Illustrator does not let you stroke a placed image. But this is this really super wonderful workaround. It's highly non-intuitive. In other words, you would never figure this out on your own. Or at least I should say, I didn't figure it out on my own. I have to credit this technique, by the way, to fellow lynda.com trainer and one-time product manager of Illustrator, Morty Golding. But once you know it, it makes a kind of sense, and it's very easy to apply. So here's what you do. Go ahead and click on the boundary of the image here in order to select that placed image file. Then go to the appearance panel, and most people can get this far. You go to the appearance panel and you figure out you can go ahead and add a stroke attribute. So go ahead and do that. Click Add New Stroke. And then, of course, you're thinking, hey, I didn't know this. You can add a stroke to a placed image inside of Illustrator. I heard you can't, but you can because I just did. And I'll go ahead and leave it black for now so I can see what's going on. And I'm going to change it to the full size of my bleed right there. That is 18 points. So I'll click inside that line weight value and I'll change it to 18 points thick. And that's going to be a big, meaty, 1/4 inch stroke, but it's not there. It doesn't show up inside of the illustration window because it doesn't work. Even though you can add this stroke, it doesn't get added. And the reason is, even though this technique, what I just showed you, works in every other vector program, it works in InDesign, it works in the other illustration programs, Freehand, Corel Draw, going way back too. Illustrator's very picky about this. You can only stroke a path, and there is no path outline to work with here. Unlike InDesign, the image doesn't actually have a frame. And so what most people do is, in frustration over this, of course, they go ahead and draw a rectangle around the image. And then you go ahead and stroke that rectangle because then you have a frame to work with. Or you could assign a rectangle to the stroke attribute. That's the trick. And here's how it works. With the stroke active, you go up to the effect menu because this is a live effect that we're about to apply to the stroke. It's very important that you're applying it to the stroke, not the linked file. Then go to Convert to Shape and choose Rectangle. And that's going to convert the stroke to a rectangle. I know, makes a kind of weird sense, I guess, but there it is. Now notice, if you've got the preview checkbox turned on, you can see a stroke around your image. It's a big, thick stroke. That's great. It's too far out. If you want the stroke to be centered on the edge of the image, go ahead and select Relative. That's the way to work anyway. You don't want to have absolute selected because if you do that, in our case, you draw a square that's 36 points tall and 36 points wide right there under the robot's arm, and that doesn't do you any good. So you want relative, that is relative to the size of the image, which, hey, Illustrator, you do know how big the image is after all, so why didn't you just stroke it in the first place? Anyway, make sure relative is turned on, change the extra width and extra height values to 0. That's what you'd normally do, and then you would have a stroke. If you were just trying to assign a 1 point or half-point stroke around the edge of an imported image, then you would go ahead and assign that stroke value. That's the first thing you do. Then you assign this rectangle attribute under the effect menu, and you change the relative width and height values to 0 point apiece. And then you would click OK. Now, that doesn't really serve the purposes of our image, however. We need to assign a different color, we need to assign a different blend mode, and we need to scoot that stroke inward. And we'll do exactly that in the next exercise.